Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a rare stream for this channel. I am not so obvious, but now I go by my real name, Mark Houghton, the Shadow Führer of England, at least according to Hope Not Hate. So deal with that however you will, just for my crime of bringing mostly young people together and trying to help them make sense of this world. I'm joined today by Morgoth Review. Welcome, Morgoth.
Hello, Mark. Nice to be on here. Nice to have a chat.
Yeah, it's been a little while. We've met before a couple of times at conferences, shieldings mostly, and I think once somewhere else, but I can't remember what exactly that was called. And I've followed your stuff for a while. Obviously, you've done a lot of film review, which no one ever seems to appreciate as much as the political analysis. But I do enjoy a good bit of film review with Morgoth.
Yeah,
it's been a lot of my side of things. I watched which one? What was the latest one? The one Rollerball.
Yeah, Rollerball.
Yeah, so good, man. I loved it. I immediately went and watched it afterwards.
It's sad that the views on classic movies are like absolutely abysmal. Some of them I get like sleeper hits, and like because maybe that film becomes sort of fashionable again, or there's a remake of it or something like that. And I'll go back and like years later, I'll discover that it's got like a ton of views. That happened to the Dirty Harry one and Carlito's Way one. But then many of them just like sink without a trace. And I think it's because some of the films are kind of a bit old and they're not really very well known. But a lot of them are. I do try and keep it a little bit sort of where the films that we choose, there's a lot to say. And it's like all of my best takes are like offloaded into classic movies, and nobody watches it. But it's something for like the die-hard Morgoth fans. They get it. They understand it.
See, I think it's something. It's a bit like different eras of music, right? Where something suddenly comes back into the cultural zeitgeist, and it can either do that through like what you might call the nostalgia baiting, like Marvel's famous for Stranger Things, famous for baiting with a lot of either remastered or updated 80s and before music. But also just the fact that we're in an era where the formula for popular music and popular film thinks it's been solved. I don't believe it has, but it's the prevailing sort of state of play that we're in at the moment that it has been solved. So you just get the same thing produced over and over and over again. It used to be quite difficult to produce a sound. I was watching a bunch of old music documentaries about how they synthesize sounds for TV, for instance. And there's just this great big room with like one machine, and its entire job is to make one particular sound, and that it was created at great expense, and so they got as much out of it as they humanly could before they moved on to the next thing. So all of the innovation kind of came from the scarcity of these different textures and sounds that they could get out of these things. And then and now, of course, it's all digital, and you can produce any number of different wavelengths as you want. In the same way that sort of like the mid-budget film has sort of disappeared, where there's not a director who they'll chuck, say, $20 million at and say, make a sleeper hit. He's got a background in horror films or something like that. Even on bigger projects, like Peter Jackson prior cutting his teeth on horror films and then being given the keys to the kingdom with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I know it's brought up a lot in our circles, but yeah, it's a funny old one.
I watched that new Frankenstein film last night, and I know that it's fashionable for to just shit all over everything now and say that it's a dead culture. And obviously, like few stories being told as many times as Frankenstein. I actually think that might be like Frankenstein might be the most filmed story of all time. And it was kind of strange. I thought, well, I don't actually hate this. It wasn't really woke, offensively woke. It wasn't where because it's set in the 1800s, and I thought, oh, we're gonna get like diversity in like 18th, the 19th century Austria, and there wasn't any of that. But you're constantly looking at it. We're just waiting to hate it because you've been so book broken by just being fed shit for so often that you kind of sit down and you're just waiting to be like you're just waiting to be betrayed, and you're just waiting for the axe to drop, sort of thing. But I thought it's all right, actually. I'm not going to say that it was an amazing film, but I'm not going to say that it was total garbage either. It was just sort of a generic good film. But I did think the monster wasn't particularly scary, and he kind of.
I did see this, yeah.
The monster was like this sort of. He was like a disaffected Zoomer, and because he was quite. I mean, he's a good looking chap in real life. He's like 6'4", and he looked. I mean, I put a tweet out about this. He kind of looked like the same thing from Prometheus with the engineers.
With a few more carved bits on him, yeah.
Yeah, and they made it so that the scarring where it was put on, it looked almost like he was kind of robotic, instead of like the usual, like say the Robert De Niro one and the Kenneth Branagh, where you could see all the stitching and it was kind of putrid and it didn't match up properly. And I was thinking, and when I was watching it, I was thinking, oh no. When I began to see where the direction that they were taking in it, and I didn't want to get too carried away because I was thinking, well, and I do know the story. I do know that there's questions being asked of the creator, the father, and all of this. But I did kind of begin to think, is he a trans? Is that where this is going here? Because it's all about like, oh, you don't fit into society, and I'm angry, and I'm like, I wonder if like, and I was trying to work out, I wonder if this is a kind of last gasp of like an insidious woke, where instead of just like having out and out, is Frankenstein a trans? Is that what they're trying to say here? And probably not. And then I went back to think, well, maybe they're doing that thing where it's like to appeal to a Zoomer audience, they've got to make him this kind of angry incel thing. And I was like, well, oh, then again, maybe there's none of this in it, and it's just me.
Yeah, it's difficult to, or it's not difficult to. It's easy to fall down the rabbit hole where you're searching. So it's almost instinctual, right? Because you've been stabbed in the back so many times by so many different pieces of media that you end up instinctually looking for it, and then you worry that you found it, even if it's not on the face of it there. And you're sort of picturing in your mind's eye, even though it's not obvious within the film, the TV interview that will cross your timeline in 3 weeks' time when, ticket sales are flagging a bit, and the director is there talking about how it's a trans narrative, that's what you're already playing in your mind, even though it hasn't happened and probably won't happen,
And what's interesting as well about Frankenstein is that if you go back and you go back to the Hammer horror ones, like it's clear, it's quite clear that Frankenstein, like the actual monster, if you want to call it that, the creation, he is the bad guy. He is the monster. He is the one that, with his arms just sort of straight out in front of his face. And he just like this big lurching zombie with bolts in his neck. And he's clearly evil. He gets put down in these kind of Gothic horrors, the classic Gothic horrors, along with Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and Dracula. And werewolves, they're all of a piece. But what's interesting is that when you get into the Kenneth Branagh one, which was, I think it was made in like 1997, you'll find it's a bit more morally grey. It's a bit more, hang on a minute, like you actually do feel quite a bit of sympathy for the monster, but you know, it's not that much. Like you've got he's still horrible. But you can sympathize that he is this, as there's the quote from the actual Mary Shelley book, a blot. He is an abomination. He is like what undead, or as they say in Warhammer, like never born. And at the same time, you can see there's this sort of the Promethean sort of Faustian elements to it, which are quite apparent with Kenneth Branagh's depiction. And in this one, that's there as well. But I feel as if like the sympathy has tipped way over, so that it's Dr. Frankenstein who is the true antagonist of the piece, and it's the monster who is essentially the good guy. So you kind of in the course of Frankenstein, we've gone like into a culturally where you begin and Frankenstein is just the bad guy, and you get into our era and Frankenstein's the basically the protagonist of the story.
It's a surreal moment in history. What you're describing, I would call the sanitization of the monstrous. And it is something that, in the same way that in any given action flick, if you take a film like, I don't know, Predator, something like that, yes, it's campy, right? There are silly moments in that film. But when they're in the jungle and they have no idea what's going on, and they've just found a load of skinned human beings and things like that, it's genuinely tense. They're freaking out. Whatever you say about the datedness of the effects or whatever, there's an underlying seriousness to it, and that is absent in so much modern media with the sort of whereas before you would have Arnold Schwarzenegger has a fight scene with bad guy. Once the bad guy's done quippy one-liner, or one-liners in between the action scenes, when they were actually fighting, there was less. I mean, there was some goading, but it feels like there's more of a serious bent. There was an allowance to be taken seriously in the film, whereas in the modern era, we can't take anything seriously in that sense. So everything is downplayed and softened. All the edges, there's no sort of hard edges. At the same time, you can see the societal lens where we've turned very introspective. All the liberal ideal of scalping yourself essentially for your crimes of the past, whilst turning a blind eye to any atrocity elsewhere, means that you can't even perceive the other as danger, as evil, as whatever, or it's deserved. This idea of the revenge narrative. Oh, don't you think we deserve it for colonialism? It feels like a reach, but I feel like the parallels are there, where you have this scenario where instead of a young Victor Frankenstein committing a taboo, ultimately in search of knowledge, and then being horrified by what he created and failing miserably to comprehend and deal with this, and that thus creates the monstrous the monstrous edifice that is the monster, who, despite the fact that he could potentially have been an intelligent and reasonable thing, is still at the end of the day a monster because of because of Victor's mistakes, along the way. To the point where now the very fact that Victor is willing to challenge those taboos and create the monster is itself an act of evil in and of itself, and thus the poor pitiable creature who he creates is now no longer monstrous in that way, and is only contextualized by the monstrousness of Victor. I could be talking out my arse, Morgoth. You never know.
That is what it's like. They've also made him. He's actually more like the Hulk as well. So like you can shoot him and it doesn't matter. Everything just
regenerate.
goes over. He'll regenerate straight away. That's. I mean, one of the was when you mentioned the Predator, and I saw a clip. They've got a new one, and they've made him. He looks like an urban youth, and then I mean, you could say it was always the case, kind of, but now it's this thing again where
there's no grit. It's the sanitized edges. He's a soft boy. You know, he looks like he's made of rubber even more.
I saw a clip of like two Predator. I didn't click on it, but they were standing there having a conversation, and it was really like, oh, what are we going to have to eat today? Spaghetti bolognese. And then like the other one was like, oh God, I'm so tired of spaghetti bolognese. And that just from the movement and the way they were interacting, like it was that kind of domestic kind of banality. And I thought this is like the greatest hunter in the universe. This is a creature that just gets dropped onto random planets to hunt things down, and it just looks so bad.
Also, right, like if we want to go predator lore here, the reason it's dropped onto planets is to prove itself, and if it doesn't prove itself by hunting sufficient prey, they're exiled from society or murdered or whatever. You know, like they're a strength might makes right society, right? You get all the status from killing the biggest, baddest thing and the smartest, nastiest thing. So, like, either you got like the run to the litter has come down to earth this time, or he's not taking it seriously enough for the law. That's what it is.
You know? I've just got no interest in watching it.
No.
At all.
Well, after autism saves the day, Predator, I've no interest whatsoever. You remember the kid with the autism as a superpower, which the Predator's like allows him to use Predator tech or something. It was very strange. I barely remember the film. Anyway, we've gone off piste here a little bit. Maybe this is the sanitized part that will deflect any critics who suddenly come in and go, "Why are they talking about film with the title of the stream being what it is?" But we need to talk about the state of the UK, what's going on, and a particular tweet that you made about the Moors murders mugshot. Let me just pop that up somewhere. Where have you gone? Stop that. Stop this. Share the screen. That's not the right one. Let's do that one. And here we go. There we go. The Moors murders mugshot. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot I can say about this, especially when you look at what I'm actually responding to. And I know it's kind of crap to just sort of talk about what's on Twitter, but you do see everything, don't you? And this Sophie, which is an AI account, I think it's some kind of like bot. You know how they say it's bot accounts? I think it's the libtards who have got bot accounts with an AI generated photo, and then it's like this kind of retarded sort of shit lib opinion, and she's basically saying, "Remind me, were they immigrants?" And they weren't. I mean, as a couple of people said, "Oh, well, Brady's father was Irish or something." Well, basically, no, they weren't. And from her,
it doesn't matter. Yeah,
it doesn't matter. And what she's saying is, you're always going on about immigrants killing and raping all over the country, but like, look at this. You've got and it's such like it's just so retarded. Like, is this did an AI just spit this out? But it's, leaving like aside the sort of how retarded that is, I do think it's interesting when you see because the actual picture of the Moors murderers, that mugshot there, it is iconic in a dark way. You've got to be careful here, because I don't mean because they were monsters.
Yeah.
There was a massive manhunt on. They did horrible things to children. They were monsters. And there seems to be this sort of liberal idea that we don't appreciate that or understand that. And whenever I see this, and it's quite the opposite in my case, because I'm actually fascinated when we get these images and stories from the before times, which are not just this kind of positive nostalgia bait. Because I actually hadn't seen that image for years. And you immediately begin to think, yeah, what happens is, because you don't actually see an image, that image of Myra Hindley, who somebody even made a work of art with that using children's hands or something.
Oh my goodness!
It is this very dark aura around it. The peroxide.
It's one thing to have the concept of a ripper, as they called them for so long, an English or a British serial killer. A ripper, is something that we kind of contend with, and male violence in particular, we kind of contend with. But female violence shocked the country far more, which is also why more recently Lucy Letby's case, whatever's going on with that right now, is kind of irrelevant. But of course, when it came to light that all these children have been dying for whatever reason that ended up being, and we believed it was Lucy Letby, then that was huge news, right? Because the idea of a female serial killer, I think, strikes more at the core of civilized peoples than most,
Yeah, and there's the kind of the dark energy around Myra Hindley leans into that as well. But what I find interesting is that if you think you go back, and if we sort of say the before times or before 1997, just as an easy rule of thumb, because if you're old like me, I was a grown man before all of this sort of the Blairite era, multiculturalism. I was actually a fully grown man going to bars, drinking, before all of that happened. And so what's interesting is that if you then mark things into a kind of before and after like that, you could draw the line a little bit later. You could say it was Brexit, or you could say even the Boris wave, though I was thoroughly sort of pessimistic about what was going on by the time that happened. What I think is interesting is that you had this collective psychology of the British people, and within that, we had heroes and villains and demons and devils, and the two the image on the screen there of the Moors murderers, what was a kind of demonic, a cultural artifact of Britain, of objective evil. And that's how everybody thought of them. That's what they thought they were. But what I find interesting is that their crimes, like today, let me just start from an obvious perspective here. If we've had, say, 15 million immigrants coming in since, say, 1997 or whatever it is, like, what does that image mean to, for example, a Somalian or an Afghani or a Pakistani, or this kind of thing, or like to the immigrant population on New here? What does that mean to them? What does it say to them? The fact is, it's not part of their collective psychology in a way that it's part of ours.
No, because it's not part of their history at all. I mean, even the latest side. But I do then wonder what they think of more modern cases. What do sort of regular Pakistanis think about some of these grooming gang guys? There's a lot that's said in our sphere, for instance, about the unapologetic nature of it, right? Like the wives and the mothers and the brothers and the sisters, defending horrendous things done by their siblings. But you wonder about the rest of them, basically the ones who were nowhere near, right? Like there's a grooming gang in Birmingham. What does the guy in the Pakistani migrant who came here in 1997 think about that, who lives 50 miles away or whatever, right? Like somewhere not close. Which do those crimes sit the same in their mind, or is it not as horrific to them? I don't know.
I don't think it's horrific to them at all, because they know it's happening to an outgroup. They may have some qualms about potential like how this could be, there could be a backlash against them or something like that, but they will always be at the center of it. Their well-being will be at the center of it, not ours, and not a kind of universalist version of morality. Because what I was leading to is that when you go back to, let's say, the Moors murderers, you could also do this with the Peter Sutcliffe, or, which I've written about before, would be the Bulger killing, the Jamie Bull, when you got two young boys abducted a little toddler and horribly killed him on a train tracks. And I remember I think that was in 1993. And that was on the television for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was relentless, because it was like this national trauma, and it was all you had, people, the sort of the Peter Hitchens types, going in on like why there was a fundamental fault in how people were bringing up their kids, why, all of this kind of thing. And then the left would be like, we don't have enough psychologists and doctors. It was like a national crisis, the Bulger killings. And so what you find is that when you've got a homogenous society, there's a kind of relativism kicks in, because you're not actually aware of a kind of like the scale of evil. So how you designate evil is relative to what the norm is of your people. So the Moors murderers were so evil, and that is the word I would like. That's just the word for it.
I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. No,
there's no use in talking about psychological problems or that they were brought up wrong or anything. They were just evil, and that's fine to say it like that. And they were evil relative to the rest of the group, and it was as if, like, for the normal British psyche, the collective sort of cultural mind of England in particular, but I would say all of the United Kingdom, would be that the Moors murderers were the sort of the furthest degree of evil that we have a frame of reference for. Now, you can bicker about it, you can pick on some other points, and you can kind of tease, depending on how you want to have a look at it. And so they became a metaphysical evil. That image on the screen there became an incarnation of metaphysical evil, because the society was so settled. You knew what the norms were, and you knew that this was way, way outside of it. It's also why we remember Jack the Ripper for so long. Turns out he was not actually one of us, but okay. But when you get into
we just didn't know.
When we get into a multicultural society, though, which is the sort of the second part of the tweet, you'll notice that we don't actually get these iconic depictions of evil anymore. Now, I would add the caveat there that the Axel Rudikabana mugshot was a standout. That was a particular standout, but I would say there'd been one or two others like that, where you just get this sort of void of, and it isn't of. So in the case of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, they kind of look like us. They're the same stock as us. So it's like us, or somebody you know, or Sandra from down the street, or Bill from down the pub. looking back at you. But when you get to the multicultural horror and gore, that's no longer the case. And it kind of feeds into this sort of generic otherness, which is looking back at you all of the time. And so there's no longer that frame of reference of what evil is, because you no longer have such a settled society where the norms are determined, where the norms are set. We no longer really know where the outer periphery is. You can see, for example, with the grooming gangs, there's an element where that's been covered up because we just don't have a frame of reference for it. Even the name grooming gang itself is a kind of
An obfuscation, yeah.
Yeah, because what do you call it? And people have come up with their own terms. But an accurate assessment of it is actually, because they aren't all just pulled off the streets and raped. They're kind of led astray gradually. And it's a very thorny, horrible thing. And you can look at these sort of random third world style killings that you see now, where people are just stabbed to death on the streets without.
Yeah.
In the case of the classic serial killer, it was all premeditated and thought out beforehand. Usually there would be one man operating alone and this kind of thing. But what you get now, I think, is something which really belongs in the third world, where it's just that life is cheap. It's just that life doesn't matter that much. If somebody brushes into you in the middle of the street and he ends up having a screwdriver shoved in his forehead, that's just how it goes in the third world. And this is what we're becoming.
There's two things which kind of come to mind. I think what you're saying is quite salient and very relevant, because as a culture we're trying to come to terms with what we would currently describe as the new normal, right? So the first thing is the distinction between group-based child sexual exploitation, CSE, and gang-based CSE, which is a distinction which the government makes. When I was doing my research into the grooming gangs, this was something which came up quite often, because, again, what you're talking about relative to normal society, sometimes you do end up with these groups of sort of native men who are abusing kids, for instance. But their associations tend to be like quite random. Essentially, they don't tend to be familial units. They don't tend to be. They tend to have like utilize the internet quite a lot. There's like some random pedophile chat room or something, right, that they've ended up in, and then they've worked together to do this horrible thing. Whereas the gang-based stuff is like, here's a gang of people, mostly with familial bonds, and they have massively abused a population of children, and then in order to escape sort of repercussions as well, either because they've used up the child or whatever they feel about it, they traffic and sell that child onto a different gang that they also have a connection with in another city or whatever, right? This is all characteristic of these foreign gangs, where the level of violence as well that is visited upon them is far, far more extreme. And so, again, what you're describing with the serial killers, you have a single guy, say, or a couple, in the case of like Fred and Rose West or Myra Hindley, etc. And their actions, whilst absolutely horrific and so on, are kind of contained within the sphere of their own influence. The fact that they know they're going against a cultural norm, and then they go against it. Whereas what you end up with a lot of these senseless, like random knife attacks and things like that, we call them random, but they're not really random, right? Like, we can always look to their ideology. They don't publish manifestos like the Zodiac Killer or whatever, but the ideology is there, and our culture is currently afraid, at least at the elite level, to confront that there is a deep prevailing hatred of everything that's white, everything that's European, everything that's American in America, or perceived to be that way, and that underlies a huge amount of this violence, random or not, right? Like you can have things which are seemingly random, like the murder of Lee Rigby, but like clearly not random. They chose a soldier specifically. They hit him in broad daylight, and it was because he was white. I don't think they'd have hit a black soldier in the same way. You have someone like Axel Rudikbana who just goes out there and attacks like the most vulnerable people possible. A group of little girls. That's not even to mention Islam as an underlying ideology for things. But obviously, in the wake of this latest mass stabbing, I was looking into all of the mass stabbings for the past 30 years, and there have been 29 registered mass stabbings, so that's more than 3 victims, in the past 31 years, and none of them have been English. So, as in, none of the murderers have any connection to English heritage, for instance, whatsoever, or white British heritage. So, it's like this foreign force that's come here once a year that tears through, commits an act of incredible third world violence upon a society that has no frame of reference for, one, how to deal with it, or two, how to prevent it in the first place, because it's almost senseless. I think 19 of those, by the way, were unprovoked. So the other ones, they could ascribe a motive, but the unprovoked ones are the ones which are of particular interest, I think, to what we're discussing, because it's a different kind of evil as well.
There's a great YouTube channel. It's really edgy, and I hope it lasts. But called Flight from Syracuse. He gets great views. And I was watching somebody sent me it and I was saying, you want to check him out? And I was like, oh, hey, he's great. This is good stuff, man. And he's got one, his recent one is called Black Fatigue. And it's really good stuff. But then he's got an older one as well. And it's some word that I can't remember, but it's basically the concept is fear of the third world. And he does this kind of excoriating kind of analysis of like the third world and of places like Cairo and Dhaka and Nairobi, and where you have these like giant mega cities of squalor, and there'll be like 20 to 30 million people in there. And, you look at the construction of the place and it's just, everything's just shit. Everything's shoddily. It's not just that they're poor, it's that they're lazy and that they're stupid, but also that like life's cheap. And he describes them as just this ever sort of extending biomass of misery. And it's it really is like that. And I think we back in the before times, many European peoples had these kind of romantic notions of exotic places far away. And as he points out, I mean, I traveled to Morocco before the internet was really much of a thing. I certainly didn't have it, and before 9/11. So I actually went to Morocco in 1999. And saw firsthand, and I just couldn't get out the place fast enough. I just despised it. I as soon as I stepped off the boat, I absolutely despised it. I was with a mate, and I couldn't wait to get out. But I was actually in there traveling around for about 4 days, and every moment of it was just awful. And I mean, that was kind of like when I became racist. When they say you need to travel around, you need to travel, you need to experience, and it's like, yeah, I came back from that thoroughly radicalized. And you have to think like maybe the third world just doesn't have much value on life. Maybe they are just fundamentally different.
I have a direct example of this. I did briefly went to Kenya to do some charity work in about 2014, and like super rural Kenya as well, like a village on the west side of the country with no roads that led to it, and so on, right? And it was an interesting and formative experience for me. Again, similar to you, I think you suddenly lose a lot of your preconceptions, shall we say, about people, and gain a whole bunch of new ones. And I think I was talking to a taxi driver out there when we went back to Nairobi, and he valued local chap, black chap, valued a human life. He said that is about that of a mobile phone when they're out there. That was his understanding of how Africans viewed the value of human life, was about that of a mobile phone in that time, which I find just fascinating. But again, when you talk about the negative side of in the before times, you think about like the kind of strange effects that it's had on the dual cultures, right? Because child mortality was horrific, sort of compared to now, shall we say, certainly sort of pre C-section, like a huge number of sort of medical breakthroughs, etc., that we currently have, to the point now where we're having the issue that more and more C-sections are happening because we're selecting, like, women with narrow hips no longer die in childbirth, right? So because we can just give them a C-section. So you have this continual thread. This is something which has been bouncing around my mind. This continual thread when you have larger families, because there's more risk of death, and there's less protection as well. So pre-welfare state for state pension doesn't exist, for instance, right 50s, right? So you have to ensure your continuation of your family, not just for like legacy reasons, but also because you're going to get old, and when you're old you're going to need your kids to take care of you, and also you just end up with these big families, then extended families as a result of that, because everyone's family is large. So you have someone is always being born and someone is always dying, and I put out a poll on Twitter some time ago asking when the last time someone interacted with sort of a young family member or something to that effect, related or otherwise. And like a third to 2/3 of people just haven't got a family member who has part of the next generation on the way or whatever, which I find fascinating, because it just completely disconnects us from the realities of life and death. I went to my grandmother's funeral years ago and found it quite a profound experience, because I was suddenly connected once again to the thread of mortality running through my own family, right? That I was part of a chain of people that's moving inexorably towards the next step, right? And we just don't have that anymore. So people don't know how to react in the same way, like what you were saying with the film stuff earlier, where the monsters become less monstrous, or they become relatable in some way, is because people aren't actually confronted with the reality of life and death and birth and so on in day-to-day life. I've completely forgotten where I'm going with this. I did have a point that I was going to get to, but I can't remember where we started. So you'll have to forgive me for trailing off there. If you have any thoughts, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me started on death. I feel like I'm the last of the Mohegans. I feel like so many people. It's horrible when you get to your late 40s. People just start dropping like flies. Somebody I went to school with. I don't know what his actual situation was with family and whatnot. But they just found him a few weeks ago, and he was just dead in his chair. And it was just like, he's just gone. That's it. He just fell asleep in his chair and he didn't wake up. I remember him as like this ginger little sort of kid. It's terrible. It's a horrible thing.
I've remembered where I was going, which is that our society reacted to like the situation of life and death being what they are, and life is hard, and we've got to overcome that somehow in a kind of unified way, right? Like whatever you'll say about the British class system or whatever, and the disconnect, like communities formed and came together and worked for the good. And my experience in the third world is that happens, but on a much smaller scale, like really small scale. And like every village is kind of like its own little kingdom, where they look out for each other. It's like a little nation unto itself. And it really reminded me of the fact that the lines we draw on a map in Africa really are, in many cases, just lines. Like they haven't actually developed to the point where they formed their own countries in the way that the Europeans did. They've been shunted so heavily towards what we would call progress, and are trying to adjust themselves to this new state of being, whilst in their own minds, of course, they're still even further behind than we might expect, you know?
Yeah, I mean, what you can see, if to go back to this sort of the Moors murderers, the reason why they were an outlier and shunted off to the far was because they'd essentially betrayed the in-group. I mean, on the subject of like nonsense and things, there's this like without even going to the police or whatnot, the standard practice for a man accused of being a nonce in like on a council estate or something would be that he would just have it spray painted across his door. He'd have his windows put out every week. And most of the time they either left the area and hoped that it didn't follow them to where they went, or a lot of the time they just strung themselves up in their garage. And then it was actually a really vicious accusation that could be hurled at people who actually hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah, we had that where I was. We had a neighbor of ours bought a secondhand PC, and they basically, the police tracked it down and were like, yeah, there's a load of dodgy material on that, mate. And he never recovered. Like they had to move because they had all that stuff. They had the spray paint and the windows put in and everything. And he had to, obviously they'd just given this machine away to the police and gone, like, get rid of it, please. Like, just, we don't want anything to do with this. But news travels in strange ways in small communities, you know.
And I think both Myra Hindley and Ian Brady were attacked horribly in jail. I think Peter Sutcliffe actually had his eye stabbed out with a pencil or something when he was in jail. Yeah. They had to have special wards. They had to have special protection. These kinds of people to keep them away to keep them away, to keep them safe from being murdered for it. And so you have this kind of in-group morality, because as you were saying about the African villages and everything, you can then see it that, let's say, England was like one big family in terms of the kind of internal empathy from one person or another. So then that is why these people become a kind of manifestation of pure evil, is because they've betrayed the trust, the high trust society itself. They've taken advantage of it and they've murdered the most vulnerable and the most precious in that society, which puts them like totally beyond the pale. But in a multicultural context, that society no longer exists. It's been deconstructed. And so one of the things you can't do is apply that kind of thinking of hang on a minute, I'm on a floor.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
What I'm saying is you can no longer police the in-group in the same way as when you bring in other groups, because you've got a new dynamic, and that dynamic is amounting to its kind of ethnic warfare or tribalism or just outright sectarian strife, because the high trust has just been completely obliterated. But then again, so then what happens is people, to get justice, you'll notice with the kind of the non-stuff, the state doesn't actually hardly even come into it that much. It's dealt with internally within the group. But when you bring in different groups, you've got to then bring the state in as an arbiter of justice. And what we've discovered is that actually it's got its own clients group, and it won't do that either. So you've lost so much because of the multicultural society.
Yeah, this is. I think what you've really nailed on the head there is this concept of, again, instead of it being one cohesive group, right? If it was the Indian diaspora of the British people, let's say, and we were punishing someone from there could be no other allegations tacked onto that, right? Like the no idea of it would just be justice. It wouldn't be social justice. It wouldn't be racial justice. It would just be justice. But because we have these enclaves, these colonies now in our country, everything can be framed as you're picking on the little guy. This concept of punching down. You're attacking a group that's trying to make a name for itself in a good way, and you're in our community. It's like, well, it's not our community. You're a separate community that has committed an act. And now there is a kind of sense of collective ownership of that act that exists. And instead of us dealing with that issue, being an act of policing, right? And in the sense of policing being looking into your own community and cutting out those elements that you don't want, it becomes now an act of aggression from one group onto another. Like we're colonizing them with our sense of morality and justice. And that is a crime in and of itself because, all cultures are beautiful or whatever that happens to be, right?
Yeah. And, it gets back to that thing again where we have to, there's this Sophie, if that's even a real person, you got to pretend that these actual realities as they exist in the real world don't. And everything gets reduced to this kind of retarded gotcha. Which is why I found it so interesting how out of her depth she was posting that image. These little things where, because the whole society has been asked, it's kind of like it's been changed with like that world engine thing they had on Man of Steel, where they were going to turn the Earth. It kind of sinks its claws into the poles, and then and terraforms the whole place to create a new country, which it kind of is. And then every now and then you find like there's something kind of breaks up through the crust from a different era, and it reminds you of just how different everything was. And usually this is kind of nostalgia bait, where it'll be like a little village in the 60s, as I was saying earlier. But when you get to the less savory stuff, Jimmy Savile would be another example of this, where they'll say like that's also an O and that's also a gotcha. But in actual fact, Jimmy Savile, Jimmy Savile's a weird thing. Like there's a whole take that he could have been a wizard. And I wrote, have you ever heard that?
Oh no, I haven't. No.
That's there. You get into some kind of weird, dark stuff. But it was, again, like Jimmy Savile was a monster, an absolute monster.
Yeah.
But he was a creature of the British establishment, the same establishment that covers up grooming gangs today. It's not an own to bring up Jimmy Savile. It just tells you that the British state is more evil and sadistic than what everyone thought.
Yeah, we've been trying to deal with it for
quite literally evil, if you believe the wizard line.
Yes, apparently. I'm assuming you mean like an actual wizard here, like a magical creature.
Yeah. I mean an actual wizard. I wrote about a year ago or so. There's a fantastic documentary on YouTube from about 14 years ago, and after the Savile thing came and went, and it's just called "Was Jimmy Savile a Wizard?" And they get into all these very, very weird things about his life. Like he was born a seventh son on Halloween, for example, and they weren't sure who his father was. And I wrote a blog post, sort of with my thoughts on this video. getting into this. I just asked somebody on Twitter before. You know, they've got these ancient ley lines across the country, and it turned like he used to jog. Apparently, he used to jog along the ley lines, like you know when he used to do charity runs. He used to jog along the ley lines. And then they said, you know, his catchphrase. There's a lot to this. And then they said his catchphrase. We had a few, didn't he? And he had now, then, now, then, now, then. And while he was doing that, he'd have like a giant cigar in his hand, which was like a wand, which he'd waddle about. And he had all of these on his actual costume. It was just crawling with all of this Masonic Aleister Crowley symbolism. Like it was just literally just jam-packed full of it. And he was right out there on the television. And what they were saying about now, then, now, then, now, then, is that it's this kind of disorientating hypnosis where it juxtaposes two words, now and then, which are kind of the opposites. And they get into all that. That's apparently like alchemy and, you know, all of this kind of dark magic stuff. They all do that kind of thing. And then
it would not surprise me in the slightest, no. It like the idea of him being massively into the occult would not surprise me in the slightest.
And another thing was that he used to he bought a flat and it was overlooking the exact grounds where Peter Sutcliffe murdered his last victim. And then when he got buried, there was so much of it, and he was right at the heart of the estate. This is another thing, like. Jimmy Savile was just a comedian on the television, but the amount of sway he had within the British establishment was just not normal. It was unbelievable. And at the end of the day, he was just this creepy old nonce. But the amount of clout that he had was just he got like awarded like the highest honors in the land. He had access to everybody, and then when he died. He got himself propped up at a certain angle so that it was as if he was looking out in the coffin and all of this. And
my goodness,
all of this kind of weird esoteric stuff. When he used to give these discussions as well on television, the first thing is he was telling everybody on television for decades that he was a monster. He would say things like, and another thing that he would do, which was weird, was that he would literally just walk the roads by himself, like this kind of perverted Gandalf figure. He wouldn't have any bodyguards. He wouldn't have anybody backing him up. He'd be dressed in like a dirty old tracksuit, and he was a multimillionaire. But he would just wander the roads and lanes of England on his own for years and years. And one of the things where he got caught, we got interviewed, and he was saying, "Yeah, I'm like a wolf. And all of the fathers and the brothers know it. They know when Jimmy the Wolf is in town, and I'm coming to get their girls." And he would say that for years and years. He'd make jokes like that on the television, and people would just be like, "No, that was all the truth." And so you think, how was he getting away with it?
And he must have. Is that as if he cast a magic spell, or people just it must have been unnerving. Must have been so unnerving. He's just made this line. You're like, that's a bit off color, isn't it? And then you just kind of brush it off. You know, go about your day. You wonder if it sat with any of them. You know.
And there was a couple of things came out. The what was it? There was the Smiths. There's a Smith. You know the Smiths song. If you have a look at the words, where it's the song about hanging the DJ, Panic on the Streets of London, I think it is it? Apparently that's about Jimmy Savile, like they knew the truth. And Johnny Rotten said as well in an older interview, like Jimmy Savile, like he's not what you think. Believe me, he's not what you think.
So I'm only just...
It's mind-blowing.
I'm only just coming to terms with the discography of the Smiths, actually, because my other half's obsessed with them. She loves them. So I got the joy of listening to was it Suffer the Children, or whatever it's called, earlier today, which is supposedly about the Moors murders. That's also a Smith song. They were quite tied into quite a lot.
I mean, just as a side note, there's somebody in the chat said, "Did you know that Jimmy Savile modelled his hair on Myra Hindley, which takes us like full circle."
That's so bizarre, man.
I mean, I bet you if you did a Google Images, that would come up, and it's true. So you can he basically came back. He went away for a while, and then when he came back, he had a different kind of hairdo, and that was when he began to get really deeply involved with the Beatles as well. So if you go on Images, I bet you there's some comparisons. And he came back and he had this like shock of shock of like a Myra Hindley thing. There you go. So that he's quite young there, and that's when he came back and he modelled his new hairdo on Myra Hindley. And all of this takes place. This is another thing, is so much of this takes place in Yorkshire. And it's as if like you've also got Peter Sutcliffe was from Yorkshire, and it's as if there's some kind of dark energy around like Yorkshire and the Yorkshire moors. Even today, there's so many of the grooming gang stuff happened around Yorkshire as well. It's as if Yorkshire's this cursed place. I mean, I'm kind of biased because I had an ex. I've got an ex who was from that area, and she was a total psycho.
We need to come up with a full theory on the psyop to make the Yorkshire accent the most trusted in Britain. Right, was directly to ingratiate the most evil people in Britain into wider society.
Yeah, it is. Have you seen look at the picture on screen there where Jimmy Savile's in the hood with Steve Coogan? On the right. On the right, you see the one.
Yes, it's this one.
There he is in full wizard garb with these with the cigars, the wand, and the whole thing. If you go in for that kind of thing, you'll notice that another thing that he did was say jingle jangle, jingle jangle. That's like another spell witchcraft type thing. And then eventually, of course, when it was all closing in on him, he just died very quickly and suddenly. I mean, just look at the picture you've got up on there now. Would you trust him to be on around kids?
Purely psychotic.
The picture down at the bottom left with Frank Bruno, that's Peter Sutcliffe, I think. He's introducing Frank Bruno to Peter Sutcliffe. Or some other killer.
Bizarre.
Or it's maybe some other killer. But so yeah, there's this kind of dark, sort of esoteric kind of stuff which goes on, and so I don't need lefties to tell me that. Oh, what about Jimmy Savile? Like you always go on about the grooming gangs. What about? Believe me, I know more about Jimmy Savile than you do. You shit lib.
Yeah, bizarre. I have nothing to say on Jimmy Savile. The only thing I was going to say was that there's a town called Savile. Let's see. It's not Savile Town. It's Town of Savile. Or maybe it is Savile Town.
Yeah, it is.
Savile Town being the most Muslim area in Britain. It's like 95% plus Muslim now, and it's so surreal because it is an English town in all of its architecture and everything, but there's not a single English person there. It's very bizarre. Let's see. Because there was a big thing where they visited some journalists visited the town it has almost no white residents. This is an old article. And this is in a time. This is 2016. And yeah, they sent a white journalist, and the guy, they just got shouted at in the street, "Go away! You shouldn't be here. Don't come back." So you've got to blame Yorkshire for a lot of things, including the birth of very strange immigration stuff as well. Maybe the test bed is Savile Town, linked to Jimmy Savile, because Yorkshire is actually the most evil county in England. This is the reality.
A few years ago, well, going back quite some years ago, I had to do a podcast with an American podcaster, and we did this kind of really deep dive into some show that I'd been on, and it was about child abuse in Yorkshire. It was set in the 60s and 70s, and it was a bit like Our Friends in the North, about the sort of the scamming and building those cheap shit high-rise block things. But it was like that, but it was about corruption in the unions and sort of pedo rings and this kind of thing. And it was all in Yorkshire. And it was all about police incompetence, police cover-ups and back scratching and all of that. And this was nothing to do with the sort of the Islamic angle on it. This was all entirely native. It's again, you just get this kind of there's just dark things going on in Yorkshire. I mean, I always think how Werewolves in London was kind of, it started with the two American backpackers in Yorkshire with the mists and the wolf is on the moors and everything like that. I remember when I was with my ex, I went to Halifax, and I thought the Northeast had grim places. But it maybe it does now. But I was shocked because you know those light bulbs that they've got now. This is going back like 14 years.
Okay.
But they've got like they've got these light bulbs everywhere now, which are like eco-friendly, and they're just like sort of pinpricks. So everywhere gets this sort of liminal space. And Halifax was the first place that I went to where these were in, but they weren't really working right. And so when you would walk around, you would have this typical sort of Yorkshire aesthetic where you could see the hills in the background and it was dark. But Halifax city centre was just totally desolate. It was just completely dead. Whereas in the northeast, you'd have like a few drunken lads, you know, you'd have a few rowdy bars and stuff. And a couple of slappers, like with fish and chips and stuff, who beamed it on the piss. But in Halifax, it was just dead. It was just the only thing you saw were like young Islamic lads in the hatchbacks, sort of screaming around the place. But the general sort of mood and aesthetic was just this kind of creepy liminal space, sort of uncanny valley where everything was dark and dead. And the light, even the street lights, like were creepy because it was just like little pinpricks of light. And I remember thinking to myself, this is the worst place I've ever been in my life. And this is horrible. This is just such a depressing, horrible place. And I know after that, it turned out I was kind of vindicated on the Yorkshire question. Like I just found it to be a profoundly creepy, dodgy place. But it could, you know, I'm probably offending quite a few me kind of northern, not fellow Northerners.
There's a poor chap in the chat who's clearly from Yorkshire or well disposed, who one thinks we're entirely serious about Yorkshire being the source of all evil in the UK. Just blaming them for everything, you know. We found a new scapegoat, or taking your anecdotal experience to be, you know, like a deep personal attack, you know.
Fundamentally, though, if we never had the UK, if we never had the multicultural project and everything, like Yorkshire would probably still be active as this like dark portal to another, like to hell or something. but what's happened is that they've terraformed Britain and kind of put a crust, put this thick layer of sort of global homo slop and third worldification across the top of it. And so the kind of the Yorkshire portal has sort of been covered up, and maybe it's kind of bleaching out underneath. But
there should have been a third bomb, is what you're saying, and it should have exclusively targeted Yorkshire.
Well, you know, so the Moors murders hark back to that kind of portal of evil that's in Yorkshire. It's this kind of authentic evil to Britain, not this sort of technocratic, depressing version that we've got now. So,
it's the ancient, the pagan portal to pagan hell.
Yeah, I'm down with all of that. I'm down with like there being like little lodges in Yorkshire where people are doing all of that.
You know the Green Man? The Green Man has always been in a war with Yorkshire, trying to hold back the forces of the damned. That's what it is. The Yorkshire pudding is actually a deep philosophical representation of the portal to hell itself.
Yeah, it
that's
is.
Why that's why we fill it with gravy. Right, we've got to fill it in. We've got to block it off somehow.
So yeah. I mean, my impression of Yorkshire growing up was Last of the Summer Wine, but views change, I suppose. It's sad.
But now we've come to realize the awful truth. Yorkshire, you're going down. All right, I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
All right.
We'll have to do another one another time, I'm sure, when something interesting happens. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.
All right.
And yeah, we'll see you around. Take care. Salavi. Bye-bye.